Hey everybody, this is Katie Green with the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce. I am here with Suzi Woodard, who is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and supervisor for Blue Mountain Center in Boone. It's Friday, we are ready to relax and recharge, and Suzi has offered to take us through a self-calming activity.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is a quick and simple thing that you can do, and it's completely flexible. You can do it for just a moment, and it will be calming, or you can stay with it for as long as you want to. Some people will just make it sort of a 15-20 minute experience because it just feels nurturing, and if they're in a hard place it can feel very comforting. So the way to start is take one hand, it doesn't matter which one, and place it over the center of your chest, and imagine this sort of circle around your palm as being right over that kind of center spot there, and feel the warmth of that. And then take your other hand and place the palm of that hand gently on top of the other one. And you may notice that with just a little bit of pressure from that second hand, you get a lot more contact from the first hand that's actually touching you up against you. You can do other things with the fingers if you want to, but for this purpose, the main focus is on the palms and the warmth and contact there. When we do this, it connects with the front part of the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, and its functions are complicated. But this part of the vagus nerve will calm down the body from this contact. As soon as we do this, it will start to reduce the speed of the heart rate. It will slow down our heart rate. And that helps cue some other parts of our nervous system to calm down the rest of our body. So if we have been upset, if we're super stressed, if we're anxious, this is one of many very quick ways that we can calm that down, that we can begin to calm our bodies, our physiology, and then we can begin to feel calmer emotionally, mentally, because it's all connected in there. It's all different parts of the nervous system. And so if you just do this and breathe and notice what happens, most people will notice at least some amount of calming. It won't take away the emotional reaction that you may have been having. It won't erase or zap away the stress instantly, but it will help you become more able to just kind of be with it and be calm with whatever's going on, and then begin to be able to think through what you might do next. It's also used as a part of some more multi-step, multifaceted self-calming practices, self-compassion practices, but you can use it all by itself. Some people call it a butterfly hug because you may notice that my hands make that sort of butterfly shape that sometimes we've used as kids in shadow play, but that's not the point of it. They just sort of wind up in that position when we do this. So take just a moment and just kind of breathe and notice, and then we'll go back to talking.
Suzi, that was so great. Thank you. I hope that everybody viewing the video was able to just relax and feel the activity as well. So I mentioned that Suzi is a licensed counselor at the Blue Mountain Center in Boone. Suzi, tell us a little bit about the practice.
We are a group of 6 licensed psychotherapists, and we all come together because we share that orientation of integrative health, which what is more common now. It's more mainstream, it's more accepted now, but when we first started Blue Mountain Center for Integrative Health, it was in 2003. And it still was a pretty new thing to be talking about psychotherapy from a truly holistic point of view, not just a sense of, yeah, we recognize there's a mind-body thing, but to really actively include some of the practices that involve the breath, that involve the body, that involve lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, all those different components that already at that time were beginning to have research supporting how much they affected what we think of as mental health. And since then, that research has really exploded. So we know a lot more about all of those different pieces. We know not much more in Western science about the effects of mindfulness practice on everything in the body. We know much more about how different ways of breathing affect all sorts of functioning in the body. We've known for a long time that the stress reaction affects everything in the body. That was, in my opinion, kind of the beginning of people beginning to get that concept of it's all connected, it's all related, that people used to think of stress as sort of a mental thing. And then we found that we could measure changes in adrenaline and cortisol if somebody took a blood sample, that we could track different places of muscle tension and different places of heat in the body from the changes in circulation. And that began to kind of encourage people to look more and more in that area. And then as the technology developed for being able to study more and more of the different facets of our body functioning, we've really begun to be more and more clear about exactly how those connections happen. There's still a whole lot we don't know, but there's so much more that we know now that we didn't used to. So it's a very exciting area to be involved in. So we incorporate some breathing practices that are now very science-based, that have been that have a long history behind them, some of them, and some of them that are newer. We involve some yoga practices that are just basic stretches and movements and postures that you can do in a chair, or you can do just standing up. You don't have to go take a fancy class or turn yourself into a pretzel, but very accessible. Just shift some posture even that can shift how your mind and body are functioning and how strong or weak you feel. Things like if you hunch your shoulders for long enough, you may start feeling more anxious or more weak. If you roll your shoulders back and sit with more of a straight back, or stand with more of a straight back, you may begin to feel more confident. You may have more sense of strength going into something that's difficult. So there's lots of little things like that that will cue different parts of your body in different ways, and that will affect how you think and your emotions, how your body's functioning.
That's wonderful. And I think that, as we've seen with this shift in our work schedules and our workplaces,
Mhm.
that kind of hunched over feeling as we're, at home in our little safety net in our little offices, I certainly over time start to feel the tension and the stress,
Mhm.
and my body, not just the mental, but the physical as well.
Mhm.
Thank you, Susie.
Sure, you're welcome. And one of the implications of that is a real nudge to do what a lot of people have been telling us to do for a long time, which is if you're going to be looking at a screen for very long, to set a timer, make yourself get up and move and stretch and stand up and breathe some different air and get your shoulders back, shift how your body is, because we will begin to cue a sense of stress or a sense of being overwhelmed, even when we're not. We will trigger, there's a part of our brain that's always scanning for danger and trying to decide if we need to go into a stress reaction or not. And it's going 24/7. And we used to think that it would get cues from around us, like, I don't recognize that person, who are they, or what was that noise, or what's that smell? And we do get those cues, but now we know a lot of the cueing comes from internally. So if we are breathing very high and shallow, that scanning part of our brain may think that we're in danger because we're breathing in a way that we would breathe if we were scared. And so part of the breathing for calming is about getting it lower in the body and slowing it down, which then cues that part of the brain so that it can say, oh, we don't need to be getting stressed out here. We can calm that whole thing down. You wouldn't be breathing slowly and low in your body if you were in danger, so you must not be in danger, so we can just calm that down. And the shoulders back would be sort of an exposed position. If something were like coming after you to attack you, you probably wouldn't just be standing there or sitting there with your shoulders back like this. You'd either be running or you'd be protecting. So when we change our posture, that cues safety, and it helps us be calm. And then depending on exactly what we're doing, it may cue some confidence. So we're working with that, sort of hacking the system in that way, learning how to change the cues from inside so that then our whole body will respond to that.
I think everybody watching probably just corrected their posture after that recommendation. So I think this is a great transition into another thing that we are all experiencing in this pandemic crisis time, is multitasking. So, you know, not just in the physical, but mental, our workspaces have kind of been uprooted. The stress levels are high. We're more anxious. So talk to me about your recommendations with managing and just keeping a good pulse on how to effectively multitask.
So multitasking is a tricky concept because it's been sort of praised and encouraged in some circles, and the science doesn't support trying to do that. The research on multitasking, and it's been going on for a while, and it keeps coming up with the same result, which is our brains don't multitask. They cannot focus on 2 or 3 or 5 things at once. So even if you think you do it well, you have that perception, you actually are losing time, losing efficiency every time you change from one task to another. If you've been working on a project for work or even a project around the house, and then you get distracted, you do something else, or something distracts you, and sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes it's a child who needs you, or somebody calls and it's an important call and you need to take it. So this is not a blame thing. But the reality is, when you interrupt one thing that you've been focusing on, you go do that other thing, then when you come back to the first thing, it's kind of like when you interrupt a movie that you're watching on Netflix or whatever, and you go do something else. When you come back to it, you may take a minute to really go, oh, wait a minute, well, what was happening? What's going on here? You may have to rewind a few seconds to catch up. And then you can go forward and sort of get your place again. Well, that's exactly what our brains do with trying to catch up with whatever we're going back to that we left unfinished. So what actually works better, what in the long run is more efficient, when we have control over it, when it's not a young child who needs our attention, or somebody important that calls us where we really need to give it our attention, when we can, to plan our schedules so that we spend a longer chunk of time doing one thing at a time, to the extent that we can choose to do that, and to either figure out a reasonable amount of time that we can give it, or a task completion goal if that's reasonable. If it's a task completion goal that turns out to be more complicated and it's going to take us 5 hours to do it, then it's not a good idea to try to spend 5 hours without moving, finishing that task. So then we need to chunk it down by time frame and give ourselves some breaks and make sure we're hydrating and replenishing our energy, because our brain needs food ingested every 3 to 4 hours to work optimally. There's not a source of nutrients for the brain cells except for what we're eating and drinking. So we do need to make sure we're not only moving and stretching and breathing, but hydrating and that sort of thing. But if we can finish a task in a reasonable amount of time, then that may be the measure. Or if we can say, all right, I'm going to give this an hour and I'm going to work on this for an hour, and then I'm going to take a couple of minutes and shift gears and then do the next thing, we will be more efficient. For the most part, we'll be more efficient. Some of us may need to stop sooner and do one of those stretch breaks for just a minute or two and come right back. And there are lots of different ways that you can do a break that actually enhances your brain function. And so that's one of the things that many of us teach our clients, especially if they're students or in a kind of work where they do need to focus and deal with a lot of information for periods of time. There's some just real simple things you can do to make that better, make your brain be more clear and more ready to go.
That's
So,
great advice, Susie.
yeah. And one of the things that I think we've heard about for a long time, but a lot of people don't understand, is the idea of aerobic exercise, which is that sustained elevated heart rate thing, which means you don't need to be like running for the goal in a sprint, but it just, you get your heart rate up faster than normal and you keep it higher than normal for the duration of what you're doing. And for the purposes of brain function enhancement, there's some different reasons to do different kinds of pacing and interval work and other kinds of things for different sorts of results, but specifically for getting the brain functioning at its best, if we can do as ideally as much as 30 minutes of that sustained elevated heart rate before we stop, but even 10 or 15 minutes will help a lot. It will actually start the brain forming new circuits that are ready to form. And so at the end of that aerobic period, that cardio elevated heart rate period, our brains will be ready to learn new information, ready to remember things, ready to think more creatively. There's a whole lot of shifts that go on in our brain that don't happen or don't happen much except from the aerobic activity. So that's a very powerful thing. It also helps with all kinds of mood management and anxiety management, which you were talking about earlier, that this is a time when there's a lot of stuff to be concerned about, and a lot of people who, even if they were never anxious before, are finding themselves feeling a lot of anxiety now. So aerobic activity is, again, a great thing to do for anxiety management, as well as the brain functioning.
I know that that is my way to practice self-care. It's
Great.
certainly aerobic exercise. I completely agree. It clears your head and just kind of gives me a little bit of a reset. So,
Mm-hmm.
speaking of brain function, talk a little bit about what could maybe be considered a silver lining to the increase in mental health needs during this crisis time. So, if they're if more people are experiencing mental health needs and experiencing anxiety, experiencing depression. Talk about the research that has been able to be conducted on some of those self-calming activities and measures and activities that we can do to kind of mitigate the stress and anxiety that we're experiencing.
Sure. The silver lining is that we are fortunate to be at a time when so much of that research has been done and continues to be done, although a lot of the research is on hold because of facilities not being able to be used right now because of all the distancing concerns. But leading up to the need for distancing and working at home, the last few years, there really has been just an explosion of research, really fine tuning the kinds of things that can help folks calm anxiety from a lot of different directions, and people and things that can help with depression, with managing depression. Most of the folks that I work with and most of what I hear from other colleagues is that it's the anxiety that for most people is more elevated right now. Although for some people, the isolation, if they've had any tendency toward depression, the isolation can make that a lot worse if they don't live with other people who are supportive, or if they don't live with other people at all, and they don't have ways that work for them to connect. A lot of people are finding cool ways to connect with lots of other things they hadn't done before on the internet, by Zoom meetings and chat groups and those sorts of things that they've just not made time to investigate before, and finding a lot of resources online that are being really beneficial. And so some of my clients are talking about really wanting to practice all those things so that when they do go back to work or they are in person back at school, they'll have those in place, and they're hoping they'll continue those. But we can all benefit from that research that has been going on up until now, and that will, I'm sure, continue in a lot of different ways. So we know mindfulness techniques that years ago people used to think you might as well not bother to do it if you couldn't do at least a half hour to 45 minutes at least once a day. And for many, many people, the idea of sitting still for a half hour or 45 minutes once or twice a day was just not going to happen. They might do it in a class once, but then the idea of going home and doing it on a daily basis was just, kind of not even worth considering. So now we know that even 2 or 3 minutes at a time of mindfulness practice can be very beneficial. The effects are cumulative, and whether you do 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 2 minutes, it will add up the next time you do 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It will add to the benefits, and the next time you do it, it will add. So we know now that if someone does 10 minutes a day of a basic, simple mindfulness practice, and we know that the whole distraction issue is one of the most helpful parts, that it's not about that you're genetically geared toward being able to keep a focus for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, and some people are and some people aren't. It's not about that at all. It's that you have a focus, you play with coming back to that focus anytime you notice that you've moved away from the focus, and we all do that. And every time you notice and bring yourself back to, the feeling of your breath, or a word that you might have chosen, or a candle that you're trying to focus on looking at, or whatever your focus is, every time you notice you've gotten distracted and you come back to that in a calm way and just pick up again, and you get distracted again and come back, you're changing your brain. And whether you're doing that for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes, every time you get distracted and come back to focus, you're strengthening particular circuits in the brain that help with attention, that help with focus, that help with choosing goals and pursuing goals, and that help with self-calming, that help with pursuing a particular resolution in a conflict, whatever that might be. And so we're learning that a lot of things can be done much more efficiently and much more adaptively to different people's lifestyles. If somebody just loves doing that and they have a schedule that allows them to sit for a half an hour, that's awesome. But if you don't have to throw the whole thing out. You can just do a couple of minutes here and there, and you will get the same effects over time. And those effects show up in an MRI now, a brain scan, that if you do 10 minutes a day of just that very simple practice, that at the end of a month, there will be noticeable differences in the front part of your brain that does those functions that we just talked about. If you do 5 minutes a day, the same thing will happen. It will just take 2 months instead. If you do 2 minutes a day, the same things will happen, and it'll be 4 months before they show up on the MRI. But people will begin to feel the differences anyway, whether it's, a total that shows up on the MRI or not. The experience will be showing up in how people perceive themselves, how they notice they're interacting with other people, how they're interacting with themselves.
That is super helpful information, Susie. And I know for a lot of us that knowing that 2 to 3 minutes is still sufficient and has some benefit is so much less overwhelming. So Susie, I know that we talked about we just kind of closing with you being able to take us through a grounding technique.
Mm-hmm.
So Susie is going to just help us get ready for the weekend and with this technique. So Susie, I'll let you take it away.
All right. I'm actually going to combine a couple of things. And so one involves the breath and one involves body awareness. And so the breath one, and this is a very simplified version, there are a lot of breathing techniques out there on the internet, and different techniques are good for different purposes. And there's a lot of confusion out there that a lot of things are kind of marketed as calming or stress management when they're really not the most optimal for that. So if you are anxious, if you're stressed, if what you want to do is calm down, and all of this needs to affect the physiology, it's not just something's nice or we do something distracting that might be fun, but we really need to work with that physiology. And so the way to do that, one simple way to do that with the breath, is to make the exhale be longer than the inhale, and to do that in a calm way. So when people say take a deep breath, that may or may not be helpful if your idea of a deep breath is that's what we do if something scares us. That's going to cue that scanning part of the brain to kick in a stress reaction because it thinks some monster just showed up at your door. So the deep breath needs to be a calm, slow one, but especially slow on the exhale, so that you don't need to make a noise, but so it's sort of like a sigh, so that you take a normal, calm inhale and then just gently do a slow exhale. And if you want to breathe out through your mouth, some people find that helps, but you don't need to if that's not comfortable. So just inhale gently and then just exhale through your nose or through your mouth in a kind of a slow way. I'm going to make the sound, but you don't need to make it. You can do it silently, especially if you're not by yourself. So it would be like a kind of an exhale. And you can use some imagining along with that, of imagining you're just sort of letting go of the stress, breathing it out, letting go of whatever you want to let go of at that moment. It's a super, super basic way of focusing on the exhale and slowing it down. Along with that, or instead of that, a body focus, a body awareness that more and more research is supporting as a way of calming by grounding, is to notice right now where your body is in contact with whatever you're sitting on. So usually that's underneath you, under your hips, and at least part of your legs, and maybe where your back might be leaning against something if you're leaning somewhere, or if you're just sitting like on a stool, then it might be just underneath you. But take a moment, maybe do another one of those long exhales or two to focus in and pull your attention in, whether you close your eyes or not, and notice that contact. You don't need to do anything with it. Just see if from the inside of your body you can notice the feel of where your body is connecting with the chair or the couch or whatever you're sitting on. And as you do that, let yourself say silently to yourself just a bit of what's obvious, what we all know rationally, of this chair is supporting me, or this couch is supporting me, or this bench is supporting me. It's holding me up. It's solid. It's got me. I'm safe on this chair. There's something very primitive that goes on when we notice that we're being held on something that supports our weight. And when we can take a moment to notice that, it cues that scanner brain to a sense of safety, which calms down our nervous system. And the rest of the body will tend to follow along with that cueing. So many of these techniques are about cueing that scanner brain to let go of any bit of stress reaction that was going on and shift into a different gear that's more about being calm, being safe, where all the systems in our body will then work more normally, more efficiently, including our brain. The blood flow will literally change where it is in the brain. And if we're stressed, it's hyper located in the lower part of our brain where we're running on instinct and where it keeps that stress reaction going. When we're calmer, the blood flow's more balanced. There's more blood in the front part of our brain where we can think, we can be creative, we can make wise decisions, we can consider other people, we have a wider perspective, we can think more long term. So anytime we do something that is grounding us in our body, helping us feel safe, helping us calm the physiology, everything will work better.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Susie.
You're welcome.
So tell us a little bit about how Blue Mountain Center is operating. So I know that you've mentioned telehealth a little bit. If someone is interested in accessing your services, what process should they go through?
There are a couple of different ways. We have a voicemail that people can call and leave a message on, and that is 828-265-1455. Just leave a message, and there are a few of us that take turns checking the voicemail periodically, and one of us will get back with you. And if you can leave a message that's specific about, there's one particular one of us that you want to connect with and try to set up an appointment with, or find out if that person's taking new clients, then go ahead and give that information. Or you can just say, I want to find out more about what's involved in seeing somebody for counseling. How do I do that? And somebody will get back with you and have that conversation. So that's one option. You can also go to our website, and that's Blue Mountain Center, all spelled out, NC for North Carolina, because there's a Blue Mountain Center somewhere in New York State. So BlueMountainCenterNC.com, and it's a www. If you go there, you'll find information about our services. You'll find bios of our therapists. You'll find some other information about how we work and some pictures and things like that. And there's an email address that you can find on that website, and some people will contact us by email, and that's fine as well, and other people will look at the website and then call us. Some of us are also on a commonly used website called Psychology Today. They have a therapist listing, and so some of us are on there, and that's another place that sometimes people will find us. And people are welcome. It's going to vary from one week to the next about who's got space for new clients and that sort of thing, and what sort of schedule they're on, when they have openings, those sorts of things. So when it gets down to figuring that out, as well as which therapists are on which insurance panels, that's going to need to be worked out with that individual therapist. And all of us have some level of a sliding scale for people who don't have insurance or don't want to use their insurance for this. They don't want a paper trail, whatever. So we can, again, talk about that with that person.
Wonderful, Susie. Well, we appreciate all that you do to support the community and the integrative and multifaceted approach that Blue Mountain Center takes to just support and be there for the community members, not just during these pandemic and crisis times, but all the time. So thank you, Susie. We appreciate all the information.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun talking to you, Katie.